All right. Good evening and welcome to Your View with me, JJ Tabane. We're coming to you live from Linden here in Johannesburg. And tonight we are dissecting the role of the media in all of the sagas that have been going on. There's been accusations and counter-accusations. Just this morning, the Chief Justice also weighing in and using this example of the Sunday Times and the Rastafarian as an example of how we seem to be losing the plot. Of course, a couple of days ago, of course, also President Jacob Zuma weighing in, saying the media has treated him badly and so on. So I thought communication strategists and media specialists around the table, Mosidi, Mokgele, who's a communication strategist, to come and help me understand. Lorato Tshenkeng, also in reputation management, the MD of Decode agency, and of course from Media Monitoring Africa, William Bed. Guys, welcome.
Thank you, JJ.
I thought before we start, let's just hear what President Zuma had to say at the State Capture Commission, since that seems to be in the news this week.
There had been a problem that worried us, all of us, that in this country, the media is very biased. At all material times, it's just critical. It criticizes the country, etc. There is no alternative voice. The media in this country is very negative. In fact, a number of things that are done, which they're supposed to be reported about, at times they don't see the light of day, only negativity. We as politicians pay a lot of attention to media. Also running countries, because we would want, for an example, a fair reporting. At times, the reporting in our country is not fair.
All right. What do you think? Tell us and follow our show on hashtag Your View on 405. Tweet us at JJ Tabane. Also tweet us at Newzroom 405 and answer the question, is the media losing credibility? And of course, President Zuma they're saying the media is negative, criticizing the country and so on. I don't know, what do you think? I think if the politicians just stop doing wrong things, maybe the media will have some other better things to report, but that's just my view. Let's start with you. You monitor the media, yep, you know, on a whole range of things, and there's a lot we can talk about. There's not going to be enough time, but I want us to be crisp and to the point. Do you think there is an issue or a case to answer for the media? Just starting, you can start by commenting on what the President Zuma they had to say.
Well, he's clearly a man under a lot of pressure, so I would be extraordinarily surprised if he had anything positive to say. You know, it's a bit like Donald Trump. He doesn't have anything to say about most media. He just, you know, he deliberately calls media that have levels of credibility, that question what he does, he calls them fake news.
Fake news, yeah.
And that's done deliberately to undermine their credibility. So that's not surprising that our former president would say that when he's appearing, you know, before the State Capture Commission. But yeah. So is our media perfect? Not by a long stretch. No. Do we represent sufficient geographical diversity? Do we give sufficient voice to marginalized people, to women, to young people? No, we don't. You know, so I think that there are a number of areas that we can and do need to improve. But do we say that our media is able to give us a broad sense? And by media now, if you say, you then include entities like this one, you include the public broadcaster, you include all of our community media and our community small commercial, print media, plus then all of the other media. Despite some levels of, high levels of media ownership concentration, we've actually got a fairly diverse range of media. So to suggest across all of it that there's some kind of a common issue or drive between them, you know, that just doesn't hold any water.
Talking about that, before I get the other colleagues to come in, it's interesting you raised the issue about a commonality, almost like now conspiracy. So what we've had, you know, Pete Ramped in particular, let's not beat about the bush, saying there's what did he say? There's a cabal. It's a cabal that met somewhere. He's very specific. He says they met somewhere and decided that there is no rogue unit, right? Is that believable? Is it believable that people from different media can meet in a corner somewhere and actually, because this thing tends to come out from time to time when people maybe may not like, you know, what may look like a common narrative, maybe that may be emerging out of certain stories. right? And then they say, yeah, these people caucus somewhere and said, we're going to write this way. Believable at all?
Well, you know, if you believe pigs can fly, then sure, it's believable. Just about anything's believable these days in an age of misinformation, which is clearly what those kind of campaigns are driving towards. And just for full disclosure, he's alleged that I'm a member of this cabal. I discovered
Oh,
this.
is that so?
Yes, apparently I'm a member.
Oh, my God.
I'm a member. I've been trying my secret handshake and all the people in this room, and so far no one else has replied, you know. But I've got, you know, six bottles of Moe in the back of my car just to go and drink, because that's what we do in the cabal.
So this cabal that you are part of says the rogue unit doesn't exist. You met to agree that it doesn't exist.
Well, I'd love to have been there, because I'm not sure when and if this took place. But I guess that the critical issue here is this, is that what we're seeing, as we're seeing around the world, so we're not unique in this, is that people, when they're under pressure, they decide to put out a counter-narrative to seek to discredit what's going on. And the danger of this, and the danger of misinformation, is that it makes us no longer sure of what's real and what isn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the moment that happens, it means you can't actually tell what's true and what isn't. And when you're in that position, your democracy is profoundly compromised. So the people that are busy peddling this kind of nonsense, they're not just going for those that they target, they're deliberately undermining our democracy, and that's why we have to combat that, which means media, and they err all the time, like the Sunday Times, you know, the way that they typified that man in their story. I think it was completely inappropriate to have done so. But that said, you know, you need to make sure that you've got evidence and that you can back up what it is that you're saying.
Absolutely. We'll come back to that Sunday Times story of the weed, which the Chief Justice weighed in it, you know, which made, she used it as an example, Mosidi, that the media has got to start to introspect about what it's doing, whether it's objective or not. And he used this example to say, look at how they characterize this man. And then he said, when he watched this man on our show here, he didn't think this guy's crazy. He thought this guy's level-headed, sounds fine. You know, we got a mention, but that's a different matter altogether. Mosidi, what's your view?
I think William has also weighed in on that. He's spot on. I think where they actually got it wrong was giving him a label. Because the minute you start giving somebody a label, you start associating certain behavior.
Absolutely. And in his first paragraph, just an opening of the story, you say, weed, smoking, unemployed, Rastafarian. Finished.
Yeah, and unfortunately for the reader, you end up looking for characteristics that actually now link into the labeling that has been given. Yeah.
Absolutely. But in your view now, right, is President Zuma correct to say that the media is so negative overall? They say they are negative about the countries, negative about everything and so on, right? Or is it something that you should be saying, maybe we are in a negative era where there's a lot of negative things that are in fact happening, right? And therefore you can't then expect the media to manufacture positive things where negative is all around. What is your own perspective?
We are definitely in a negative era, but I do believe as well there's an opportunity to really unearth, dig deep for positive stories. Amongst the negative, there's quite a lot of positive things that are happening. If I recall, I think it was you actually yesterday who did say that publishers would actually make a lot currently from current affairs, you know? But equally, there are heartwarming stories. And I think as we enter a period like the Mandela Day, Mandela Month, those stories, those positive stories tend to actually come up. And but I think as well, the impression that has been created is that for you to be a cutting-edge journalist, you actually need to report more on the not-so-positive, because we tend to see the positive stories as much more softer and not necessarily as hard news.
If it leads, it bleeds. I mean, is that still how the media tend to approach things? And so we may get closer to what President Zuma is saying, that actually, unfortunately, we are sitting with a negative media, Lorato.
I suspect that will always continue to be the case, JJ, because if you remember, there was a time when at least the most pervasive observation was that for media to make money, they need to sell stories. And sometimes when you sell positive stories, the likelihood is that you are not going to make money, right? And it would actually be interesting to know what were the sales of Mail and Guardian's publication that they did, that they call the Good News, right? It would be interesting to know what were the numbers there, and see whether there is congruency between that pervasive perspective. But the most important thing, JJ...
Maybe people didn't believe it. They wanted to see what is this good news, and then they went to buy this thing just to see that this can't be true.
So then it was a good gimmick, if that is the case. And I want to take us back to, so there was a time after the 2010 World Cup, Gideon Sam convened some meeting, and he was giving a feedback from a SASCOC point of view on how we captured the imagination of the world through the World Cup, right? And they had a timeline of some sort showing all the negative stories close to the World Cup. And we remember, issues of readiness or lack of readiness, and how the positive stories started shining when they realized that in 2009 during the Confed Cup, and then in 2010 with the numbers of visitors growing, people not reporting a lot of crime. And so generally, when there are positive things that are happening in society, I imagine, or at least from my observation, is that the media then follows suit as well, right? I doubt that it was a deliberate thing from them to say, no, it's 2010, now we're going to report differently, right? We need to project South Africa positively. Things were happening positively. People were, members of society were excited about what the World Cup meant for us, whether it was for commercial purposes or just being part of...
Let's pause there, because I want to give you some more chance to just explore this link between stuff that's happening in society and stuff that gets reported. I always say that the media doesn't manufacture these things that are happening, and people just think, oh, that's dismissive, means that you are just sort of justifying that the media must report that there's corruption, there's theft, there's all of these things that unfortunately are not going away. But let's take a break. Now I'm going to take a break. I'm with a round table with a media and communication specialist trying to make me understand whether or not the media is in trouble. Are they losing credibility? Should what President Zuma said when the state capture about the media, is it to be believed? Well, I thought that we could have Ridi Tlabi here because she was particularly mentioned there. Anyway, we can only hope. Let's take a break now. Our frank talk tonight is about the role of the media in our state of the nation, and of course the state capture being the springboard with which we are talking. I mean, if you look at the stuff that's coming out of the state of capture, right? I mean, you're going to struggle to find positive stuff out of there, except maybe if you say the positive linings that people are coming out to say this is the wrong things that happen.
Of course, JJ, and you see the biggest challenge is that we have almost become accustomed to, we're expecting revelation after revelation, particularly after there are greasy revelations, right? So almost every witness or their testimony, we expect some explosive stuff, and even after Fakey Mentor, right, who was actually the first one who started this. So, but what I want to link it with is the logic of William. So William says, when people are under pressure, they tend to do the things that President Jacob Zuma does, right? If we follow his logic, is it possible that sometimes the media gets it wrong because they are also under pressure, right? Because if you listen to, let's use an example that Chief Justice Mokgele used at the press briefing. So now this was not the talk. He says, people were questioning me about, or they were talking about this issue of, are we going to swear in an MP who has a criminal conviction, right? And when they wrote the story, or at least when they did the interview, they spoke to the IEC, they spoke to Parliament, they spoke to him. But when you read the story, they only spoke to him and his responsibility. And the question, therefore, is, how is it that we get it that wrong, or the media gets it that wrong? Right, where there are three parties who are involved in an issue, and then they choose to almost nitpick. And you go to Jack Paul's excuse today, or at least some sort of veiled apology to say, you know, I perhaps should have told the Sunday Times that I didn't have to tell them about the pot smoking, whatever the case may be. Of course, we always say hindsight 2020, right? But the biggest challenge that we then have to think about is, are we going to find a way where the current SANEF inquiry is going to help us with some of these issues, right?
Yeah.
Its independence is very important. We need a very credible and outstanding media in South Africa. But if from time to time we see some of these things, one of the other things that people lament, JJ, and I know that I'm not necessarily sticking to the state capture. I'm just almost just looking at the media and say, people always lament about a News 24 in particular, when there's an issue that involves crime or corruption and there's a white male involved or there's a white person involved, they hide the face. But when it's a black person, the face is put out. And people on Twitter and almost on social media, they call them out. They never correct that. Is it saying that the disposition of the media is that, listen, we are not even sorry about some of these actions? Because Chief Justice Mokgele raises that again today to say, seemingly, corruption is black. Seemingly, corruption is public service, right? And who actually feeds us some of these stories? It's mainly from what is reported in the media. Is it true? Maybe not.
William, what are the key introspection points that the media really must now pay attention to, given all that has happened recently?
So, I mean, there's no doubt that the media and their credibility is under grave threat, and for some of the reasons about misinformation, but also because they get things wrong, and frequently when they do, they don't make sufficient amends to address the kind of issue, for exactly the kind of thing. You know, we've been monitoring children as an example over the last 15 years, and what you see is that the children whose rights are exposed and violated the most are inevitably those who need them protected the most, which means that they're the most vulnerable children, which usually means they're poor and they're black, and their rights are the ones whose rights are most frequently violated in the media. But of course, you know, and you have to address that, and that's a newsroom practice that's taken, you know, the last 15 years to raise awareness and start to shift how we deal with those particular things. When it comes to dealing with some of these other issues, you know, the media in this double bind. We've got fewer journalists. So Jacques Poe, that era, that's because there should have been some good sub-editing who would have gone through that story and said, hang on a minute, is this necessary to call this person this?
Actually, he tried to pass the buck to say, you know? It was not me. You know, I gave them the story, and then they put the headline about the weed smoking person. But that was the opener of his story. There's no way the sub-editor could have now gone to create the whole introduction.
But they should have been editing that in a process before that, so that it wasn't just left to that precise last moment before those things so that they got through. So those practices have been dramatically weakened, because you'll find that in the majority of our newsrooms, there are fewer and fewer journalists, and there are fewer and fewer systems that are able to check these things before they go out. So the pressures on our newsrooms are just incredible, you know, and it's likely they make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. It's how you deal with those and how you make amends and how you make sure that you don't make those same mistakes too often.
Eusebius Bakaiza raised a flag and couched it as the tabloidization. I don't know if there's a word like that. But with Eusebius, anything you know, can be created. Now, tabloidization of the Sunday Times. I mean, let's talk about this. This is the biggest newspaper with huge influence. And looks like on a couple of occasions now they've come under fire. What's been your analysis as you monitor how they continue to influence? Because remember, once they lead with something, in that week, we are likely to all be talking about it for the first 3 days of the week.
So, and I think that's why, you know, you mentioned the SANEF credibility inquiry. That's why those sort of things are so critical, because we've seen these mistakes a few too many times, not just from the Sunday Times. In fairness to them, other media do these things, you know, equally.
Yeah, equally
horrific and equally
Media 24 there.
You know, so other media do these things, and it really is a case of finding out how we need to deal with a range of issues in a democracy, bearing in mind that in as much as all of our democratic institutions don't get the things that they're meant to be doing right most of the time, we can expect that, you know, media as a reflection to that extent of our society are equally going to get similar things wrong. You know, those same power dynamics are there, those same ideas and patterns that have been there from apartheid through are, you know, they've been carried through, and we've done a huge amount to shift that, but we're not where we need to be.
I'll come back to that again, William, but is there a dumping down somewhere of our media? Because part of the excuse that the media has given in terms of getting things wrong is to say that there isn't a lot of capacity anymore. In the past, not even that long ago, I mean 20 years ago or so, you had a situation where media had specialists, right? People had beats. Right now, you find that one journalist writing about 10 subject matters and what have you, right? And whereas you used to have beats, you had somebody who focused on aviation, or who focused on transport, or who focused on something that's specific. And now that's no longer happening. So you may find that a journalist who has never in their lives even walked through a hospital writing about health matters.
And actually that's not far off from what we see in other industries. So I think they are under a lot of strain. If I look at what William said earlier regarding the issue of Jack Paul, that his particular article should have gone through a whole lot of editing before it actually went to print. I mean, that's a classical example, not necessarily to excuse what eventually came out of the article. And I think even the report that was done by the IAJ on the status of the newsrooms, you know, year in, year out, we do hear media professionals actually raising concerns around capacity. And I think it doesn't help that we also, you find that media houses as well are being more and more commercialized, you know. Lorato spoke earlier about a competition, or rather competition to actually sell, and sometimes even competition to write the leading story, you know. So that as well, all those factors are actually contributing to the state of media as it were, and also not helping the credibility of the industry as a whole.
Lorato, any dumping down or not? I mean, if you compare, you know, the quality of reporting right now and what used to be there, even just 20 years ago, is there a cause to worry that we have become a lot more superficial in terms of coverage, you know, in all kinds of ways?
In all honesty, JJ, I actually don't think so, and I'm saying it with this perspective. So, 10 years ago, younger journalists, or at least the people who were younger journalists, and I was a younger PR person, they are now senior journalists, right? And these are the people that whenever, from a PR point of view, when I need to, or at least in my work, these are the people that I speak to, or at least engage. And from time to time, even when we do engagements, and whether it's informal or formal, I still find that they hold their craft to a relatively higher standard, right? Of course, there will always be an issue of, if you get younger journalists into the newsroom, you will always have that kind of a thing where they are not too interested in the subject, but they also don't do too well as well to say what it is that I'm then going to at least make sure that my story is a little bit tighter. And to Mosidi's point, it happens even in our industry in PR. Junior PR practitioners, they are almost, you know, they are not as experienced as that, and you'd expect those lapses. The most important thing then is that, what are we strengthening the checks and balances? And what I'm finding is that if Sunday Times is going to have a lead story, the expectation is that their checks and balances should be at the level where you should never have this tabloidization. In fact, refer to 2 weeks back, the biggest headline was Cape Town, the most dangerous city in the world. I did not believe that, right? Because if you look at the number of visitors that come to Cape Town, South Africans and international tourists, the incongruency there says something else, right? But it is possible that whatever report it is that they have used, maybe something that is scientific, and that's how they got there, or it may be some report by some international organization. So the point really that I'm making is that I don't think that it is as bad as we put it in terms of the juniorization in the newsroom. The most important thing that I think and that I believe that the media should focus on, strengthen the checks and balances. And we can't be having these excuses over and over again.
Yeah, but maybe they're talking about the Cape Town being the only city where the army is now being deployed to fight crime. And I want you to hear what you guys have to say about that. And also just to give me your sense of the state of Capture Commission now that you have analyzed the media and its role there. I want to hear from your own views about so far how that has gone. Let's take a break now. When we come back, we round off that conversation with our media and communication specialist around the table tonight.
We don't want to see ANN7 anywhere. We don't want to see New Age anywhere in our events. We're warning you, we do this peacefully. It's not tampering with media freedom. Those institutions are a product of corrupt activities.
All right. Of course, we are rounding off the Frank Talk tonight there to talk about way forward. You see their politicians also taking out their guns. There's been a lot of discussion about the media tribunal. Is this part of way forward? You know, these boycotts. See that Malema there berating ANN7 and New Age when they still existed. But also at some point said you'll never read the Sunday Times. You know, and of course a few weeks on there was an article by him in the Sunday Times. So I'm not sure what that meant, whether that meant he changed his mind about it or not. But of course, those questions we can put to him when he does visit us soon. Carmen, what's happening on social media there?
Plenty, as always, JJ. Everyone has an opinion about the media. Let's start off with Anonymous on WhatsApp this evening. So they were saying that, JJ, if you think that the media has credibility, look at the practice of how media retracts a front page story after they've made a mistake. Andile here from Soweto saying the news is very biased. Remember that Jacob Zuma was always on a front page where they say he stole 200-something million, and it was quiet when Steinhoff stole 200-something billion of pensioners' money. So quite the contrast there. Very interesting from Andile. Patrick here saying it's true that the media is highly negative and it's continuously projecting the country so negatively to a point where it even scares investors. Well, I guess it's one way of looking at the truth. Anonymous here, as I said earlier, saying that if you think the media has credibility, look at the practice of how the media retracts and posts an apology. A headline, of course, will be on the first page, but an apology in some obscure page 3 in a little corner. I know we've all seen that before. We can't accept tabloidization of the news as mistakes. Come on. And then a final look at WhatsApp for now. Luca here from Seshego saying South African media goes with the wind rather. ENC had a documentary about the fall of Venezuela before the elections just to discredit the EFF manifesto. Quite a theory there, JJ. It's back to you and your guests.
All right. Thank you very much there, Carmen. Now, way forward, right? You can hear what the people are saying there, what the politicians are saying. What should be the one or two things that we need to get right in terms of way forward, especially dealing with issues of media credibility?
So I think SANEF's credibility inquiry is critical in terms of people making submissions, and then the recommendations that'll come out from that I think will be key. But I think fundamentally media needs to shift the way that they've operated for the last several decades, if not centuries in some cases around the world, which is that they need to start building real and meaningful relationships with their audiences, because what you see again and again and again is the sense of alienation of ordinary people and audiences from their media, that they are the ones that they are consuming. And that if media are going to have any chance of building trust and credibility with those audiences, they need to make sure that they build a meaningful relationship with them. And critically, it means you've got to also fix your things at your public broadcaster. And I mention that precisely because if you look around the world, the countries where there's high levels of trust have a stable public broadcaster, and where you've got a stable, fully functioning public broadcaster, they have the highest levels of trust in those, and their media trust in media around them is also consequently a lot higher. So it's a function
the
of
stability of the
a
SABC.
democratic nation that you need a stable public broadcaster, precisely because they're the ones who are meant to drive, particular different versions of news that then commercial entities are able to do their own thing, inject their own perspectives, and bring different levels of credibility. But that fundamental to that bedrock of credibility, you need a stable public broadcast.
Mosidi, what do you think of that? I mean, it means that we are all now at the mercy of the SABC.
Not necessarily, hey? Although I do agree that we need to get the SABC back on the mend. But talking about way forward as well, JJ, I think there's definitely an opportunity in the newsrooms to do a bit of a succession planning and coaching and mentoring. Obviously, the issue of capacity is not something that can be rectified immediately. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for the SANEF inquiry, definitely we can bring in senior journalists to coach the younger ones, and try and curb the skills gap. But also the ombudsman. I think there's an opportunity for the ombudsman to sort of emphasize or actually be quite more strict, and force the various media houses to actually apply a bit of accountability.
Talking about accountability, there was a big debate about the media tribunal. I mean, do you buy into it at all? Are we at that point where it may well be an option that may come out of this SANEF inquiry?
I really hope not. I really hope we can explore other avenues and not necessarily get into that.
All right, Lorato, way forward, what needs to be done?
One, and this is very important, JJ, the media must not be dismissive of some of these perceptions, right? So when people claim that you are not covering black people in the right way, the media is often, or at least you see in their response, is that they are not as responsive. And for me, I think that's one of the things that will always deal with credibility. But also, there's an important point to be made around how media is being consumed now. People consume sound bites, right? That is a danger, because then people often read a headline and go on and bash the media. So even that self-reflection by the media should then be a little bit more interrogative. So you can't say, no, people are complaining about us, therefore we need to do something. It's, are there studies? Do you work with the William Bays of this world, the Media Monitoring Africa projects, and say, have we spoken to our consumers? And is it real? Is this problem real? And if it is, how grave it is? So that when you come up with trying to correct the issue, it's not a band-aid on a gushing wound. But lastly, and I take this point about coaching and mentoring, right? Unfortunately, the newsrooms are becoming smaller, mainly because it's becoming a little bit more expensive to operate or to run a newsroom, right? And we must then think about what does it mean for the point that we're raising around specialization, because we get better news coverage with specialization. And perhaps then the biggest thing should we not be saying to an MDDA, focus on capacitating the community media? Because then that way, there are opportunities for many of these young people who are joining in, whether it's a community radio station, community newspaper, or an online publication for that matter. They then get to be trained a little bit more there. And I think the MDDA has a massive role to play. And unfortunately, we know the story of the MDDA. And I hope that the 6th administration will help us deal with that issue.
Yeah, unfortunately, so far it's been quite ineffective. But also they don't have enough resources. You can't change a multi-billion rand industry with some 30 million rand budget. That half of it goes to salaries and so. Let's talk about the state capture in terms of how the media has covered it, but also your views about what's been going on so far.
So it's interesting.
Obfuscation much?
Because there's been quite a difficult relationship between the media and the commission, where the commission has often been, and the deputy chief justice, very upset on a number of occasions about the fact that media have leaked stories beforehand. So it hasn't been an easy relationship. But that said, what we know is, and we're getting, it's amazing, if you follow the commission, you can go onto any one of the major websites and you'll find that they've got live blogs, links to articles, etc., etc. You can then follow it on Twitter with their things. There's WhatsApp groups that you can follow. And then there's, commentary across all of the stations. So we're getting really good coverage in terms of all of those things. And and critically, people are now able to get increasingly see the actual documents. Okay, so they said that they referred to this letter, and you'll see that they say, here's the letter that so-and-so was referring to. This is what, Barbara Hogan was referring to in her evidence, and you can see it. So those things help a lot to give credibility, not just to the commission, but to the media themselves. Absolutely. So that's a kind of symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
So we have to hope that that'll improve.
Quick comment before we go on the state capture.
Definitely, besides the few hiccups that he's alluded to, I think they are doing a great job covering the state capture. I look at people who operate in environments where they don't have access to TV or radio during the day. It's quite easy after your working day to actually try and catch up.
And catch up what happened.
With the years. So they've done very well to that front,
Lorato, you've got a last word?
Obfuscation galore, particularly this week, JJ.
I know nothing, I remember nothing, I don't know anything.
Right. And fortunately, the media has been very helpful in covering some of these stories, and even sometimes just juxtaposing some of the things that President Jacob Zuma would say, and try and remind us of something. Say, but clearly you can't be saying this if you're saying that you don't remember. And I think it's a good way of, because we need a little bit more analysis, JJ. It's good to give us rolling coverage, but then give us good analysis. And that way, we are better informed over and above all the documentation that is available, that is at our disposal.
Okay, let's leave it there. I hope that we have done our bit here. I mean, Kathy Mutlatlana and Thabo Mdluli, as well as Karen Moore out in Parktown. They have milked the capture analysis for everything. I mean, every night so far, left, right, and center. So I don't think anybody is going to complain about the analysis you are getting here on Newzroom Africa about what's happening out in Parktown. But thank you so much, guys, for your fantastic perspectives and for visiting us. I think it's your first time. Please let it not be your last time, at least in this show.
Thank you.
And you guys are regulars. It's fine. Thank you so much for being here. After the break, another round table with citizens now to further break it down for all of us, especially the issue of deployment. That came out a lot tonight, or rather today, cadre deployment, how far do you go? And of course, President Zuma saying, oh, but it happens all over the world. In fact, here we are very mild. In other places, when a new government comes, they just fire a whole lot. Here we are still nice, and so on. So we'll talk about that after the break with a round table of citizens. Stay tuned. Let's take a break now.